Hey guys, welcome back. This is lesson 118. It's on page 588 and we are starting chapter 15. And this chapter is called Relations, Functions, and Graphing. So relation, think about that word. A relationship is just something between two people or two numbers in our case for math. So a relation is just seeing how two different numbers or values relate or compare to each other. So we're going to be looking at that in the first part of this chapter. The other word I've mentioned to you in class before is a variable. A variable is, when we've been talking about X, it's a letter that can stand for something. And think about the word vary, okay? It can change. We're going to start talking in this chapter about more than one variable when we have an equation with two variables. And again, you can use any letters, but the most common ones are X and Y. Okay, so these are called variables. They stand for other values and they can change based on the relationship with one another. We're going to look at a word problem. It's on page 588 to see how this plays out. It says water is running out of a hose at a rate of 3 gallons every hour. So we know the amount is 3 gallons every hour. The hour is the time. We don't know the time, so we're going to assign X to the time. Okay? So if it's asking us, the question says, show the mathematical relationship between the time and the amount of water that runs out of the hose. So the total amount of water that runs out of the hose, we don't know. So that's going to be Y. Y equals the total amount of water that comes out. And we figure that out by doing 3 times the amount of time it takes to do that. So what we can do is we can set up a chart. We can have X on one side and Y on the other. So we know that for this is going to be time, and this is going to be, I guess I could put amount in gallons. Sorry for my sloppy handwriting. So we know that if 1 hour passes by, 3 gallons are going to come out. 1 hour times 3 gallons an hour equals that. So so that would be Y there. The Y would equal 3. What if it ran for 2 hours? Then we would put 2 hours in for X, and it would be 6 gallons. 3 hours would be 9 gallons. We'll do one more. 4 hours, 4 times 3, would be 12. So we can see here a relationship between these two numbers. Do you see that these have increased by 1 every time? What did these increase by every time? They increased by 3 every time. So we know the relationship between these two numbers, the X and the Y in this problem. For every 1 hour, there is a change or a difference of 3 gallons. So what we showed here is a 2-variable equation. We had 2 things we didn't know, and we showed the relationship between the 2 problems. So that's the first set of vocabulary words and problems we're going to do. All right, so if they wanted to, using this, if they said, okay, what if it ran for 7 hours? Then we know we can just put in the 7 for the time. 3 times 7 is 21, and the Y value would be 21 total gallons. So that's how we would work that out. So now let's turn to the next page, page 590. When we want to find what we talked about on the last page, when we wanted to find a y value, we just put in a number for x and solve. We also can find a matching x value by putting in something for y. It's just an algebraic equation. It's just, once they're giving you the value of x or giving you the value of y, you plug it in and solve it algebraically. Now there's another vocabulary word here called a function. And the definition of a function, it is a special type of relationship between numbers, between letters, where if you pick a value for x, there can only be one possible answer for y, okay? There can be one and only one matching value. For example, let's say I made a little chart and I put in the values of x of 3, 2, 1, 0, -1. And let's say I put the values of y in here at 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. In here, none of my x values are repeated. Every value of x has just one answer for y. This is an example of a function. None of my x values are repeated. They each have one specific value of y that matches them. So what if I did this? What if I did, I'm going to do what's at the top of page 591. 941, 0, 1, 4, 9. -3, -2, -1. Okay, the y values have changed. There's only nothing repeats on the y side. However, we have two 9s, so we see 9 can equal -3 in this chart, or 9 can equal +3. We see that 4 can equal -2, and 4 can equal 2. 1 can equal -1, and 1 can equal 1. This is not a function. So a quick trick here, guys, in your lesson this week, it's going to give you these and just ask, is this a function? If any of the x values are repeated with a different answer for y, then it is not a function. However, let's say they did this. They're repeated on this side. I have two 9s, but they both equal a -3. So the y value for the x hasn't changed. We still just have one value for the x value, one y value for the x value. So this is a function, this is not. Okay, so if you have different y values for the same x, not a function. If you have same y values for the x, it is a function. So that's the definition of a function. So what is that going to mean for us? Make sure I covered what I wanted to say. Oh, because of that, we would say the function of y depends on x. That means depending on what you put in for x, shows what you get on y. In this type of equation, this is called your dependent variable. It is dependent on whatever you put in for x. It is going to change depending on what you put in for x. It is dependent on that. This one is your independent variable. okay? Whenever it's set up like this, whichever variable is by itself is your dependent variable. Whichever variable is within the equation is your independent variable. So, looking at that, let's look at the practice ones. Look at page 591, letter B. It says, tell whether this relationship in the table represents a function. So let's look at the X column. Do any of those repeat? No. So that is a function. Every X value has only one Y value. It doesn't matter, look on the right side, it doesn't matter that there's two negative ones for the Y's. On the X side, -1 equals a -1 for the Y, and a 1 equals a -1 for the Y. That's okay, because every X value has just one matching Y value. So that is a function. All right, let's look at letter C. It says, for the function, which you guys have seen these, we're just used to calling them relationships or equations. And equations are just functions showing relationships between the numbers. For the function y equals 4x plus 7. Don't get thrown by the words. It says find the matching y value if x equals 3. All they want you to do there, guys, is plug in 3 for x and solve. Don't get thrown by the terminology. So we do that. It is 12 plus 7, which equals 19. And you would write y equals 19. Same thing for letter D. It says you have y equals 3x plus 2. Find the y value that makes, no, it says find the x value that makes y equals 8. And this is actually a -3. So it gives you what y equals. So you have to look. If it gives you the y value, plug that in. If it gives you the x value, plug that in. So here it tells us that y equals 8. So now we have to solve this algebraically. Subtract 2 from both sides. And we get 6. I'm going to rewrite it up here. 6 equals -3x. Divide by a -3 on both sides. And we get -2 equals x. And that's your answer. So just look at whatever they give you. If they give you x, plug that in and solve for y. If they give you y, plug that in and solve for x. Okay? Let's look at number 1, true or false. A relation is a relationship between two variables, such as x and y. That is true. It's just showing a relation between two variables. Number 2, a function is a special kind of relation where if you pick a value for x, there is only one matching value for y. Don't bump, Veda, go that way. That is true. Number 2 is true. X can only have one matching y value. Look at number 3. The equation y equals 60x represents a function. That is true. You have y equals 60x. You have where you're going to have a relationship where there can only possibly be one correct y value for that x value. So go ahead and read through, take time to read through that lesson. It's one of those things that's super simple, but it can be super confusing. So take some time to read through the examples and email me if you have any questions. See you next lesson.